Hi, I'm Siarrah Gomez, and my research is Chirping for Change. I really like to eat bugs, so I decided to do my research on why other people don't like to eat bugs. A lot of times when I tell people about my research, I get replies of people being disgusted or concerned, and sometimes intrigued. So I want to tell you a little background about how I got here today. I know I'm doing my research on crickets, but this story actually is about how a worm changed my life. So my freshman year of college, I was a vegetarian for about a year or so, and unfortunately, it was not going too well. I was having extreme nutritional deficiencies, and I never stopped thinking about eating meat. So it was one dark and stormy day that I came home and the rain had pushed all of the worms up from the ground. And as I walked home from the bus stop, there was one particular worm that stopped me in my tracks. And it was big, and it was plump, and it was juicy. So I walked over to it, and I picked it up, and I gave it a squeeze. And when I did that, my mouth started to salivate, which, yeah, it was kind of a really awkward experience. So I went home, and I Googled what the heck was wrong with me. And then that's whenever I learned the word entomophagy, or the practice of eating insects. And I learned a couple of really cool facts about entomophagy, some being that we have eaten insects for tens of thousands of years, obviously, right? All of our many primates eat insects as well. And people today still eat insects. About 2 billion have insects as a part of their regular diet worldwide. I also learned some really cool facts, being an environmental studies student, that I was very interested in, such as, for one, they're really healthy for you, as they're filled of a complete animal protein filled of all the essential amino acids, calcium, iron, B12, and a fiber that has prebiotic properties as well. I also learned that they are very sustainable for the environment. Compared to beef, they have about 100 times less greenhouse gas emissions. They also take a lot less land to rear. If you think about our traditional agriculture like cows or pigs or chickens, they need to have a certain amount of space around them to be healthy. Otherwise, we have to pump them with what? Antibiotics, right? With insects, you don't have to do that. They actually really like to live close together, and they do best that way. You can farm them in these little boxes as well and keep them so they're happy and tight in those little boxes, and then take those boxes and then build them on top of each other. So you're building vertically instead of horizontally out. I also learned that they use substantially less water. If you're comparing them to the cow again, it takes about 22,000 liters to produce 1 pound of beef. For crickets, it takes 1 liter to produce 1 pound. So my next mission was to try some insects. And I happened to be in Washington, D.C. over the summer with a couple of other Fort Lewis students. And I looked up this restaurant called Olla Mel Cocina. I convinced the other Fort Lewis students to come along with me to try some chapulines tacos, or grasshopper tacos that are fried crispy with a chili lime flavor and then fresh guacamole. And after my first bite, you could say that I was bugging out on entomophagy. And so then here I am today, doing my research and figuring out how we can get people past this idea of neophobia, is what they call it, a new word that I learned, which is basically get them over this ick factor of why they don't like to eat insects. So for my study design, we started off with a pre-survey so we could assess where people's current attitudes were about eating insects when they came in. Then we gave them a panel of 4 smoothies to taste, 2 being chocolate and 2 being berry. Each flavor had either a cricket or a rice protein powder. And then an infographic that had a couple of facts that I've already shared with you today. Then, because this tasting was blind with the 4 smoothies, we gave them the answers on whether or not they guessed the right smoothie. And then we gave them a post-survey to compare the answers to the pre-survey and see if their attitudes had changed. The people who applied for or who participated in the research reported that half of them had eaten insects before. And this was surprising to me for 2 reasons. For one, I was just not expecting that many people to have eaten insects before. But when I started to think about it, it did make sense, as when you came into the research, you knew exactly what was in the smoothies, so it was already people who were open to eating bugs. That makes sense. Another thing I'd like to point out about this is that although 50% report they had eaten insects, I bet you 100% had eaten insects before. 99.999% sure. Whether that be just from walking around and having some insects fly into their mouth, whether by having an insect in their drink. And also, insects are part of a lot of our common foods. There are insect fragment parts allowed in peanut butter, coffee, chocolate, any spice you make, cinnamon, black pepper, oregano. They're in tomato sauce. I guarantee you've already eaten insects. So we asked people if they had eaten insects, what kind of insects have they eaten before? And we got crickets the most, ants, worms, scorpions, and then grasshoppers. When asked what concerns they have about consuming insects, people reported they were concerned about the taste or the texture as the top 3, disease or poisons, taboos, safety issues, whether or not they're going to have stomach issues, and then lastly, that bugs are ugly. I have a true appreciation for this comment, and it really got me thinking too about what we eat, and we eat on this spectrum of cute to ugly. And we like things that are just like the Goldilocks in the middle, right? So over here we have kittens and puppies and little duckies, and yeah, you're not going to eat that, right? And then over here you have rats and reptiles and bugs. And we like something right there in the middle, like cows or chickens or pigs. It's an interesting thought. Food for thought. So when asked which smoothie they thought had the cricket powder in it, most people actually guessed incorrectly. There were a few people who had guessed correctly. The light green is the people who had guessed the cricket powder in the smoothies correctly. And then the dark green is everyone who had guessed incorrectly. It was interesting, too, that at the end of the survey, people reported to like the chocolate cricket smoothie the most. When we compared the results, we realized that people had become more comfortable with eating insects. They saw them as beneficial, more nutritious, and less risky after being exposed to insects, learning that they probably got the answer they submitted wrong about which smoothie had the insects in it, and learning some educational pieces. So as far as what suggestions for making insects more appealing, people had said putting it in common foods, having general education, which is a big one. That's why I included it in part of my research. Having accessibility or having them available at your local grocery store. Better marketing to decrease the stigma, and then just to have some general recipes. I like to point out that people were most concerned about the taste and texture, but afterwards they were not concerned about it at all. So what to do now? I think that now is a good time to stop and reflect and question ourselves why we don't eat insects anymore. They have been part of our diets for tens of thousands of years. Many people eat them. They're very nutritious, they're good for the environment, and they're abundant as well. There's some reasons why we're not eating insects today. And a couple of those are the othering of people, as when colonizers came here to the US, they would say that eating insects is primitive or savage. There's also the idea of the agriculture boom. As soon as we had our agriculture boom, then we had this other idea of thinking about insects as being pests or being infestations. They're actually referred to on the FDA's website when you're allowed to have these little insect fragments as an infestation, and I question that wording too. I think of it as more of an othering for other people eating bugs as well. And so what next I want to do is challenge you all to take some action, whether that be talking about insects, thinking about it, sharing it with your friends, or also eating insects as well. I forgot a really important part of my talk, so I'm going to say that too. So when I was doing my Google search and learning about entomophagy, I actually learned that my ancestors ate insects today. I'm half Kiowa Apache and I'm also Mexican. So it was very interesting having this experience of salivating over a worm and then later realizing that, oh, many of my ancestors ate insects as well. I think that was really cool. So back to the action part. I want to encourage you all to take a step outside of your box. And I gave you the perfect opportunity to do that today, as I made a little treat for everyone. And it's insects two ways. So for those of you that don't want to see the insects at all, we have chocolate chirp cookies, is what I call them, or chocolate chip cookies. And they're made with a cricket protein powder, the same cricket protein powder that we put in the smoothies, but we just bake them into cookies for you. And then we also have chapulines, the first insect that I tried. We have them, they come from Oaxaca, and they are seasoned in an adobe chili sauce with garlic and lime as well. And it's the whole insect, so you can see it. You're going to have the legs and the wings and the eyes and everything, for those of you that are a little more adventurous. And as I leave here today, I want to ask you one more thing, is just to think about what if the solution to reducing our carbon footprint was right under our feet the whole time. Thank you.